Afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to score 760 on the GMAT. We also call this webinar our GMAT strategy session. In this webinar, we talk about how should you think about your GMAT study plan depending on what your strengths and weaknesses are. Then we go on and talk about how to create milestones for that study plan, and then how to track those milestones. This is a free webinar. We do solve a couple of questions, one question in quant, one in verbal, during this webinar, and the question in quant is around word problems. The question in verbal is around boldface, and if you've not and if you're not familiar with those concepts, we do send a few video lessons your way. The video lesson in boldface is the one that's most relevant, but then we also have a few other video lessons in our free trial. So if you have not gone through the boldface video lesson, I would very strongly recommend that you go through it post this webinar. We also have some upcoming free webinars. We have a free webinar on GMAT's intense correction, and in this we talk about e-GMAT's famous meaning-based approach. This webinar is a week from now, which is next Saturday. It's probably our most attended webinar, so I do recommend that you register for it, go through the prerequisites to make the most out of it. And then we also have a free quant workshop, which is tomorrow. Think of it as a proctored mock in quant, in which we do three things. One, we evaluate where you currently stand. Second, we tell you why you got a certain score, and then we also then help you create your improvement plan. So again, if you need help in quant, really helpful workshop, regardless of whether you are at a Q38 or a Q45 or a Q49. This is a free webinar. It's quite heavily attended, and to make sure we can do justice to this group as a whole, we ask a few leading questions. One of them is when do you plan to take the test, and the second is what's your target GMAT score. Based on the data that I have data from about 130 odd people. We have two big groups over here, those who have between 46 to 75 days and those who haven't taken a date as of yet. And then we have three small groups. A few of you have your exam right away, a few have between a couple of weeks to a month, and then between 31 and 45 days, that's about 15% of the class. With regards to the target GMAT score, let's get a few more responses, guys. I have 118 students in the webinar. I only have 55 responses to this. All right, let me hide this. We have 65, 67, 70 responses to this question. All right, again, the most popular category, the 730 to 750. If you're applying to top schools, that would be your target. 760 plus if you're looking for a scholarship or a full fellowship, that definitely helps. And then the 710, 720 bracket is quite popular as well. Very few people in the 6 to 700 bracket, about 1.5%, 1.3% or so. And then quite a few folks in the 730 to 760 bracket. All right. With that, let's go right into the webinar pane. The screen will have or will be in the process of changing for you. I'm going to give you guys another 20 to 30 seconds so that the screen settles down for you, depending on which part of the world you come from. Now, once the screen does settle down for you, what you're going to really see is a presentation pod where you'd say key strategies to score 760 on the GMAT. You'll see my photograph, and then essentially below that you're going to see a Q&A or a question and answer pod. Okay, let me just do simple yes no thing, yes no poll, and to really see if you guys can see the presentation now. It says GMAT strategy session, select yes, otherwise select the appropriate response. For those of you who've selected no, I would just recommend you join again and the problem should sort out by itself. If you are on a relatively slow internet connection, usually when we transition from one room to the other, it doesn't transition as well. So if you just join again, the problem will sort out by itself. Okay, With that, let's go forward. There are essentially three parts of this webinar. In the first part, I'm going to do a brief introduction to e-GMAT. For many of you, this is your first, let's say, encounter with anyone from e-GMAT. So this introduction will tell you who we are, what our philosophy is, etc., etc. Then we'll go into right into the webinar, and that's going to be for about another 2 hours or so. And once we are done with the core of this webinar, which is the strategy session, we're going to go into an open-ended Q&A session in which if there's been any question that has not been answered during the webinar, we'd be happy to answer that question. At this point, let me also introduce my colleague Komal Shah. Komal is a GMAT strategy expert, and she's also an ex-Be the GMAT moderator. So she's been helping students ace the GMAT for close to a decade right now. And she's here supporting us during this webinar. So in case you have any question during the webinar, she'll be able to respond to that or reserve it towards the end. With that, let's start the first part of the webinar, which is an introduction to e-GMAT. So earlier on, I asked this question, what's your target GMAT score? And about 70+% of you said that you wanted to score a 730 or higher. While that is the case, I can tell you that only 6% of the people statistically actually get to a 720 or higher score, and this is despite the fact that median scores at top B schools continue to go up. This data is from last year. This year we'll get a fresh set of data points sometime in July or so. But again, we've seen this trend go on for the last few years or so. Now, what is it people who actually get to a 720 or higher score do? A good percentage of them use e-GMAT. Why do we say that? If you look at the key stats on GMAT Club, which is number of verified reviews, or the number of success stories that mentioned that are written over there in the last 12 months, what you're going to find is that e-GMAT has almost twice as many verified reviews as all of the major test prep companies combined, and specifically, similarly with the success stories, again, e-GMAT was mentioned more frequently than pretty much every other prep company combined. In fact, for the month of April and May, I think about 65% of all reviews and success stories on GMAT Club mentioned e-GMAT. So what makes our students more successful? I think there's one thing that makes our students more successful is how we approach your GMAT preparation or the architecture of learning that we believe in. So when you think about architectures of learning, you look at the blogosphere, and what you're going to find is there are two architectures of learning that are predominant today. One is what we call as a book-based architecture, and the second one is a private tutoring-based approach. When you look at the online offerings from major prep companies, what you're going to find is, yes, they have audiovisual instruction, yes, they have quizzes, but all of those are built around this book-based architecture. When you look at e-GMAT and then map our offerings to, or our learning architecture to these two architectures, what you're going to find is that we are built a lot more around this private tutoring-based architecture. So let's see, why is it that we say that e-GMAT is built around this private tutoring-based architecture, and why is it that this architecture or a private tutoring-based approach helps students much more than a book-based approach? To do that, let's understand how would you get to a score of 720 or higher. An efficient way of doing this is to first create and understand for your strengths and weaknesses, what's the best way to get to that score. Then learn the concepts that you need to learn. Then you need, just knowing the concepts isn't enough. You also need to know how to apply those concepts. And again, you need to get so good at applying those concepts that you attain a level of mastery that is essentially superior to others. So let's see how a book-based approach solves this problem. A book-based approach is all about autonomy. So when you start studying from a book, what you get is a couple of study plans. You need to choose one of those two study plans. Now, which study plan you choose is something that is decided by you, and essentially it may not be optimized to your strengths and weaknesses, but it's what's given to you, and you go about doing that. Then you go on to learn concepts. Now, the number of books that teach concepts really well. One area where they fail, however, is they don't help you validate whether you've learned the concepts or not. And that burden of validation is completely on the student. When it comes to application of concepts, that's kind of where books primarily don't do as great a job. Why? Because just the static nature of the book is not designed or is unable to tell you how should you approach a problem, what do you do in step one, what do you do in step two, what do you do in step three. And when you do solve a problem, it's unable to point out at the step in which you faltered. Now, people who study using books learn application by solving hundreds and hundreds of questions, and only the best and the brightest are able to get there. And similarly, when it comes to evaluation of mastery, people who follow the book-based approach take tons and tons of mock tests. I mean, there are companies that offer 15 mock tests and really say, hey, you should take a mock test every week, which for me is essentially, bonkers. You, uh, you are you're not going to ace the GMAT by taking mock tests. GMAT's a very different exam than some of the other exams, which you can actually ace by taking a mock test. A private tutoring architecture works very differently. When you work with a good private tutor, one of the first things that a good private tutor would do is to create a personalized study plan. And how a private tutor does this by evaluating your strengths and weaknesses and making sure that you spend enough time to overcome your weakness. And then at the same time, that study plan also ensures that that essentially you get the maximum out of your strength. Then a private tutor would teach you concepts, and as you're learning concepts, the private tutor would give you feedback so that you actually learn the concepts properly. One area where a private tutor makes the most difference is teaching you how to apply those concepts, and essentially a private tutor, while solving questions, will tell you what do you do in step one, what do you need to do in step two, and if you're faltering at a particular step, a private tutor corrects you over there. And when it comes to evaluation of mastery, as you solve questions, a private tutor would constantly evaluate your performance and tell you the areas that you need to work on. And if you've done well enough, it'll ask you to go from sentence correction to critical reasoning and so on and so forth. So you can really see, while you learn the same content in both these approaches, the extent of personalization, the extent of feedback is a lot more in that private tutoring based approach. And it's easy to see when it comes to hitting that 90th percentile or higher, why a private tutoring based approach would be more effective. So let's see, why is it that we say most of these other offerings are built around this book based approach, whereas e-GMAT is based on this private tutoring based approach. And the example that we will take is to go from a 600 to a 720 score. And the first step you need to do is to create that study plan. So let's see how we attack that problem in a scalable fashion. For every e-GMATer who starts an e-GMAT course, the first thing we require that person to do is to build their own personalized study plan. And we've created a utility that allows you to do that. Now, this utility is powered by 3 neural networks. It has artificial intelligence built into it so that you get a precise study plan, or which we call as precision study plan, based on your strengths and weaknesses. So how does this utility work? Let's say it starts with understanding what your current score is, and it tells you what your current quant and verbal scores, or it takes in your current quant and verbal scores. Now, in this case, what you're going to really see is that this guy has a 50th percentile in both quant and verbal. Now, because this utility is an intelligent utility, it understands that a 50th percentile in quant corresponds to a Q44, whereas a 51st percentile in verbal corresponds to a V28. And a Q44, by definition of ability, is a lot higher ability than a V28. Just for those of you who don't know about the history of GMAT, but 8 years back, a Q44 used to be a 74th percentile. So when it comes to ability, Q44 is a lot higher ability than V28. So accordingly, what it does is, when suggesting a plan to 720, it first improves your quant score to a certain degree and then improves the verbal score so that you get to a 720. Now, you can take that recommendation, which for most people, I think it's an excellent recommendation. But if you want to change this, you can manually change this as well. And as you change one value, the other value changes automatically so that you always get to that 720. Now, you have a target quant and a target verbal score. Now, the question really is, how do you hit a Q50? How do you get to a V38? And to do that, it again has another neural network that tells you how do you actually get to a Q50? What are the various ways? And based on the student's profile, what it recommended is that you hit an 83rd percentile in both arithmetic and algebra. And Similarly, on the verbal side, it recommended the corresponding percentiles based on this particular student's strength and starting points. So when this happens, when you do this, what really happens is your GMAT preparation is no longer a black box in which you're studying. It is a set of 5 neatly defined milestones that you need to achieve. 2 in quant and 3 in verbal. If you hit those milestones, you're going to hit that 720 score. Why? Because that 720 score is actually composed of those milestones. Then you have to figure out, okay, how much effort do you put into to achieve these milestones, and then it actually creates a study plan based on your starting and ending abilities as well. So for example, over here for arithmetic, the student needs to spend about 10 days to go from a 59th percentile, which is on the left, to an 83rd percentile. Similarly, in critical reasoning, it's about 13 days to go from a 49th percentile to an 84th percentile. So when you do this, you're actually preparing for in 5 different stages, where you're going from your current level in sentence correction to your target level in sentence correction. Similarly, in critical reasoning and in reading comprehension. Not only that, it also gives you a day-by-day plan. It tells you how many hours you need to study on a particular day. It tells you the sequence in which you have to study, etc., etc. And you can customize this by putting in the number of hours you're going to study on a weekday and on a weekend, etc. And if there are certain days on which you can't study, you can just click on the day and essentially change that number to 0, and then the plan would adjust by itself. So why did we spend 1,000 hours building this utility? So that each one of you can create your own personalized study plan in 7 minutes or fewer. And I can tell you, some of you probably work with a private tutor. Even a private tutor does not provide as granular a study plan. Well, that's about study plans. Let's talk about learning concepts. Now, remember, a private tutor teaches you concepts, and then based on how well you learn those concepts, gives you feedback on specific areas. We've designed our technology architecture and our learning content to just do just that. This is a screenshot of the subject verb module over here. What you see on the first 4 lines, just 2.1 to 2.4, are video lessons that teach you various concepts in subject verb. Each video lesson has a built-in assessment. These assessments not only evaluate how well you've learned those concepts, but also teach you how to apply those concepts to a certain degree. This feedback's personalized to you. This time that you see over here is the amount of time you spent on that. The beauty of this is when you learn a concept, you instantly know how well you've learned that concept, and you get feedback that's specific to you, so you can improve on this. Now, if you compare this to another popular course out there, which is by Magoosh, again, subject verb, what you really see is these are just a few video lessons, and these video lessons are, I mean, essentially, if you look at this table of content, it just reads like a book. There are 2 video lessons on subject verb. And again, there's no feedback. This time that you really see is the time of the video, not the time that you spent on the video. The next thing that a private tutor does is it teaches you application of concepts, whereas when you learn subject verb, you should know how to apply these concepts on a real GMAT-like problem. And then to do that, what do you do in step 1, step 2, and step 3? To do that, we actually have invented an entity called an application file, which does just that. Then you have a practice file that evaluates your ability over there, and then you have a list of official guide questions that actually help you apply these on real official questions overall, and they come with comprehensive solutions as well. Again, the feedback's very specific to you. And this is how every module, which is whether it's a quant module or a verbal module, is designed. Now, again, you compare this to the Magoosh course. What you really see is there's one quiz which is common to subject verb, auxiliary verbs, pronouns. 5 questions. There's no score. Why? The intent is just to give you practice, but not to give feedback. Now that you've learned concepts, now that you've learned how to apply those concepts, then comes the evaluation of mastery. How do you figure out whether you've learned sentence correction well enough to hit that 90th percentile or not? And the reason why this is important is because you're studying sentence correction to hit that 90th percentile, not merely to learn SC. Um, to do that, we built this tool called Scholarium, in which you can take a sentence correction ability quiz. It tells you what your ability score is. And this is an ability score in a pristine environment, so your performance in sentence correction is not impacted by how you're doing in critical reasoning or reading comprehension. Not only that, it also tells you where to focus on to improve. So in this case, this particular student clearly needs to improve his performance in comparison to be able to hit that 90th percentile. So what are the key differences between these two approaches? While you're studying the same content, the extent of personalization, the extent of feedback, the extent of application that you learn is very different in the private tutoring based approach. And you can really see how we map the entire learning content as well as the technology architecture to this approach. Who's created and defined some of this architecture? Four of GMAT Club's top 5 rated instructors have defined this, and instructors who've been reviewed a lot more frequently on GMAT Club. And you can go there, read instructor reviews, and you can really see people who've done this have been at this for a lot longer than pretty much anyone else in the industry. So while only 6% of the people get to those scores, you can really see why a good percentage of them use e-GMAT. One of the other things which is there is that because of this architecture, because of the feedback, we actually provide the world's best guarantee as on the GMAT. So on a verbal we offering, which is our GMAT Live Prep offering. On the verbal aspect of the GMAT, we provide a guarantee of up to 7 points, depending on what your starting score is. And this guarantee goes all the way up to V44, which is 98th percentile on verbal. With that, I've come to the end of my introduction. If you want to stay updated with all things e-GMAT, if you want to stay updated with all things that are going on in the B-School world, you can connect with me on my LinkedIn. I have about 11,000 students who are connected with me on my LinkedIn. Okay, some of you have been asking for the batch calendar. Here's the course calendar overall. There's a question over here which says, what should be the accuracy to achieve a score of 740 or higher? That's a question which you'd see answered in this webinar, and the answer is it depends. And because GMAT's a computer adaptive test, I can tell you 2 people with the same accuracy can have very different scores. One of them could get a 650, the other could get a 760. Okay, so with that, let's get to the second part of the webinar, which is how do you score that get to that 760 score. So we're going to go over here. And the second part, I want to achieve 3 things. One is to define your overall strategy, which is how do you allocate time between quant and verbal, and what should be your target quant and verbal score depending on what your strengths and weaknesses are. Now, once you have those quant and verbal scores, you still need to achieve that, and we'll talk about core skills. We'll look at why developing these core skills are important. If you want to get to those 720 or higher, or 730, 740 scores, and I'll tell you why, because I'm sure many of you have been preparing for the GMAT, and while initially when you prepare for the GMAT your score improves, I'm sure many of you have hit a point where you study, but your score hits a wall. It just doesn't improve beyond that point. Has anyone experienced this? Which is that when you start studying for the GMAT for the first 30 to 40 hours or 50 hours, your score improves, but then you hit a wall, and no matter how many hours you put in, your score fails to improve. That's what we call as a situation of score plateau, and we'll look at why that happens in this second part of the second core part of the webinar, and why is it that you need to build on these core skills if you want to get to that 760 or higher score. And then we'll look at, okay, now that you have a strategy, now that you understand the importance of core skills, how do you study so that you track your improvement overall? And this part, this third part, is built more specifically for e-GMAT students, in which we look at the various components of e-GMAT course and how they help you track whether you're actually improving or not. Okay. I have a couple of questions. Is how many marks should you take to get to a 720 score if you just want a generic answer? Typical students take about 5 marks. If you're taking more than 5 marks, then you're not doing justice to the learning aspect of it. But again, you would get a much more detailed answer during this webinar. One thing that I want to emphasize on is that again, a lot of people come in and think they're going to get to understand some tricks through which they're going to fool the test in this webinar. No, there are no tricks when it comes to the GMAT. It's simple, pure preparation with an effective tracking system that helps you get to that 740 odd scores. Anyone who tells you that they're going to give you a trick on reading comprehension or sentence correction or quant or other things, they are giving you something that's half-baked. It applies to some questions that may not apply to others. So it actually ends up doing more harm than good, or they don't understand the GMAT. But again, 91% of you have hit a score plateau. So we'll look at core skills as when we get there. Okay, let's talk about strategy in the context of GMAT. And a lot of you know what strategy is. So when you hear the word strategy in the context of GMAT, or in general, doesn't matter whether you talk about it in the context of GMAT or in general, what comes to your mind? What do you think is strategy, if you can put in your answer in the short answer part? Okay, I have about 16, 17 responses. Thirty-two responses. I'm going to start sharing the responses right now so you guys can read that. Time management, structured study plan, following the right approach, how to time, okay, efficient process, a lot of time management over here. All right, so we're going to look at this. So some of you really have a good idea what strategy is. Others are focused on one aspect of it. Probably that's the aspect that's bothering you. So we'll look at this. Strategy, by definition, is a plan of action which is designed to achieve a particular goal. Okay, so the three things over here. First of all, a strategy is always goal driven, and why it's important is that a strategy to achieve 700 and how you approach that would be very different from a strategy to achieve a 740 or a 760. The second thing is it's designed, which means that that depending on who's gonna execute the strategy, the strategy will be different. And then it's a plan of action, which means it's a sequence of steps that need to be executed properly. If that's what a strategy is, let's look at what's a good strategy. A good strategy is something that provides maximum benefit. Benefit in the context of GMAT is score improvement. So the delta between what your current score is to where you end up overall with the least input. Okay, and least input doesn't mean less input. It means compared to all the other paths, that is lower input. So the least input might still be for someone who's starting at a 550 and wants to get to a 720. It might still be about 130 hours or so. It's not less input, but it's less than all the other options to get to that 720 score. And typically how a good strategy does it is it first capitalizes on your strengths and then allocates enough time so that you can overcome your weakness. And that's something which is really important. When you study for the GMAT, you don't have to put an uniform effort on every aspect. Depending on who you are, you need to modulate your study plan. You need to modulate how much you study in a particular subsection. You need to modulate how you evaluate yourself at various stages of your preparation. Okay, There's certain hallmarks of a good strategy. First of all, it's always goal driven. You should know what you're gonna aim for, and you should understand what that score is. And that's really important because a lot of people really say, and 90+% of you say that essentially you want to get to a 720 or higher score, and about 80% of you said a 730 or higher score. Now, those are 90 percentile or more. And what you're really saying when you say I want to get that score is you're saying that out of all the smart people in the world, I want to be in the top 3, top 4 percentile of students. And yet, when it comes to studying for the GMAT, many of you are, and I say we get screenshots from our students, and sometimes you guys have other tabs open in the same browser. You're not completely focused. If you want to be among the top 5 percentile of students, you've got to learn how a bit of self-control. And that's where you need to define that goal, not just put that number on a piece of paper, but understand what that number means. Understand the sacrifices you need to make um, uh, behind to achieve that number. Then the second piece that needs to happen is you need to understand your situation as well as your current strengths. Now, how many of you, when you started studying for the GMAT, went to a friend of yours or someone who you knew had done well on the GMAT and really asked that person, how long did it take for you to ace the GMAT? And if that person said 2 months, assume that you're going to take approximately a similar amount of time. Or in other words, how many of you just took a friend's study plan and really have started working on it? How many of you have done that? Okay, there are a few of you who have, a few of you who haven't. About 30 to 40% based on the data that I see over here have done that. Now, let me just say this. It's really helpful to have someone who's gone through the same ordeal, who's struggled through preparing for the GMAT and has succeeded. It's really valuable. That person could be very helpful in your overall GMAT preparation. But taking someone's study plan and thinking that the same would apply to you could be very dangerous for 3 reasons. First, that person may have a different set of strengths and weaknesses than you do, so that someone who's not as great in reading comprehension may spend 2 weeks, 3 weeks studying reading comprehension, whereas someone for whom reading comprehension comes more naturally may not need that time. The second is his or her situation may be very different. That person may not have as demanding a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a spouse as you do. That person may not have as demanding a job as you do. So assuming that you'll be able to put in the same amount of effort that they do is sometimes very wrong. The other piece which is there is that person and maybe someone who's a fast learner and you may not be, or vice versa. One of the things that I tell people when it comes to taking anyone's study plan is make sure you have a similar starting point. Make sure you can put in a similar amount of effort and be realistic about it. And make sure you know yourself when it comes to learning. I'll tell you a personal story. When I was in college, I had this friend who was a batch topper, and as he actually topped 7 out of 8 semesters in college. Now, the crazy thing about this guy was he wouldn't study during the entire semester. 20 days before our exams, he would just start studying, and essentially, he was so good at studying, or mugging, as some of you might call it, but that he would ace the entire batch. I mean, we had about 400 people over there. Now, had I followed his strategy, I would actually not be where I am today. Why? Because that guy was a real fast learner. I am not as fast a learner. Now, in the end, does it matter whether I followed his strategy or not? Not really. What matters is how well I did on the exams, because that's what in the end determines where you reach. Okay, so each one of you has had upwards of 20 years of learning history. Understand how you learn. Bake that into your assumptions. If you don't do that, you're more likely to falter. Take all of those things into account and then create a plan and execute on it. When you do that, you're going to find that your likelihood of success will become much higher. The takeaway that I want to make sure we have is that a good strategy is fairly personal, is something that's devised by you and has these numerous checks and balances in place to ensure that you are going in the right direction. So with that, I want to talk about one key term over here, actually two terms, which is really, really important. One is the term percentile. Probably the most important term when it comes to the GMAT. What is percentile? Percentile is a generic term which talks about your relative rank out of a population. Now, let's assume about 250,000 people take the GMAT every year. The real number is about 220 or so, but 250K needs to real nice, neat math. So I prefer that. So if about 250K people take the GMAT every year, if you're aiming for a score of 760, what you really are saying is, I want to be among the top 2,500 students who take the GMAT every year, which means I want to be better than 247,500 students. You are aiming for a 700, you want to really say, I'm going to be among the top 30,000 students, which means you want to be better than 220,000 students who take the GMAT every year. That's what percentile means at a very high level in the context of the GMAT. But this percentile is embedded in every aspect of it. So when you talk about sentence correction, you get an SC percentile. When you talk about algebra, you get an algebra percentile or arithmetic percentile. Another common term which you rarely see is accuracy. Accuracy is something which has no ranking associated with it. It's actually the person. When you take a 10-question quiz, and if you answer 8 out of those 10 correctly, accuracy is 80%. It's the percentage of questions you answered correctly. Now, many of you ask the question, how many questions do I need to get right to get a 740? What you're asking is accuracy, which on the GMAT is a very vague term, and we'll look at why that is the case. What is ability? Ability, when put in context, is your rank in that particular section. So your ability in algebra will be your rank in algebra compared to all the other people. Your ability in sentence correction would be your rank in sentence correction. Okay. On the GMAT, remember, your percentile is a true measure of your progress. If you want to measure your progress, measure your percentile. Why? Because you may take a quiz and get 8 out of 10 right, but your percentile could still be 50% depending on difficulty level of questions. Similarly, you may take a quiz and get 6 out of 10 right, and if those questions are difficult, you may still be in the 90th percentile. So just remember, ability is a percentile, accuracy has no percentile context, and accuracy can lead to some very misleading conclusions. Before you start preparing, the one thing that you need to do is you need to define your target quant score and your target verbal score. And let's see, how do we define that for someone who wants to score 700? So we're going to divide this entire class of 150 students into 3 groups. The first group is someone who's extremely strong in quant, or someone who we call as a quant whiz. The second is someone who's strong in quant but not strong enough to be called a quant whiz. And the third group is someone who's not strong in quant. You may be strong in verbal, or you may not be strong in either quant or verbal. In any case, if you're not strong in quant, regardless of your strength in verbal, put yourself in this group. If you're someone who's very strong in quant, you want to get to a 700, make sure you leverage your strengths first. And by that, what I mean is you get to a Q50 or a Q51. Essentially, what this means is on the verbal side, you only need to improve to a V33, V34. Don't even bother studying verbal unless and until in your practice test you get to a Q49. If you're someone who's strong in quant, very similar strategy. Make sure you get to a Q49. Accordingly, you need to score a bit higher on verbal, but again, get to a Q47 first. If you are not strong in quant, which means you may be strong in verbal, or you may be strong in neither quant or verbal. If you're not strong in quant, make your strategy verbal driven. Why? Because between quant and verbal, and if you're not, quant is much wider in scope for someone who's not strong in quant than verbal is. So if you're not strong in quant, make your strategy verbal driven. Aim for a 90th percentile in verbal, and then study verbal first, and then get to studying quant. Again, the takeaway that is there is capitalize on your strengths first, and then spend enough time to fix your weakness. Now, some of you may be asking, if you have to study both quant and verbal, why does it matter whether your strategy is quant driven or verbal driven? The reason why it matters is because to achieve a certain level of excellence in either section, you need to put in effort, and that level of effort increases as the higher you want to score in that particular section. For example, to get to a 96 percentile on sentence correction, you may need 30% more effort than what it would take to get to an 85th percentile. Okay. So when you put in your strategy to be either quant or verbal driven, what you're really doing is you're leveraging your strength. You're getting to that peak performance in the section of your strength, which means you don't need to perform as much as well in the other subsection, which means that you don't need to put as much effort, and at the same time you're increasing your likelihood of success. We work with about 10,000 students every year, and these are 10,000 paying students. And one of the things which I hate to really see is there are certain people who are really good in quant just owing to their background. They're people from IITs or econ background, econ students from Princeton University over here, or other good schools. And when I look at their GMAT scores, they end up with a 730, and I look at their verbal scores, you have a 95th percentile there, but on the quant side, they only have a Q48. When I asked them what happened, their simple response is, I thought I was good in quant, so I didn't study. Don't make that mistake, because that could be a difference between essentially getting an admit to a Columbia versus getting an admit to a lesser ranked school, or getting a fellowship from Wharton versus just getting an admit to a UNC Keenan Flagler. Okay. So essentially, why does it matter? Because A, it's efficient. B, you're much more likely to hit that target score if you make your strategy strength driven. Okay. So this was about hitting a score of 700. You guys want to get to much higher scores. So how do you get to those scores? Try GMAT Planner and essentially get your own personalized study plan, in which will tell you how well you should study, or how much effort you put in each of the subsections. And for those of you who don't have your starting scores, who don't have your starting abilities in arithmetic, algebra, or SCCR and RC, take an e-GMAT mock test, or one of what we call as a Sigma X mock test. They will give you all of these abilities. So use Sigma X mock test with GMAT Planner, and you're going to get your starting scores. Now, a lot of people think, once you get to a 720 or so, your GMAT score fails to matter, and which actually in today's world couldn't be further away from the truth. A lot of people also think if you want to get to once you get to a 720 score, the way to do that is do well in either quant or verbal, and do very well in one subsection or one section, I'm sorry, of the GMAT, and do slightly above average in the other, and you can get to a 720 score. And yes, you can, but essentially these schools have gotten smarter about how they evaluate applicants from various regions, and so in today's world you need to do well in both quant and verbal. Now, you can still do better in quant, or still do really well in verbal, but you still need to do good in the other section to be able to make the cut. Why do I say that? Since 2014, what B schools have been doing is they've been evaluating people by regions, and you can see a couple of articles at the bottom. The one which says on B school test, Americans fail to measure up. This is an article from 2014. It was written in Wall Street Journal. Essentially, I'm going to talk about some excerpts from this article. So, to address those concerns, what is the concern? Americans aren't scoring as high as Chinese or Indians or South Koreans do. GMAT in September, and this is September of 2014, introduced a benchmarking tool that allows admission officers to compare applicants against their own cohort, filtering scores and percentile rankings by world, region, country, gender, and college GPA. Sarah Nair, who's the assistant dean of MBA admissions, said that she's someone who actually reached out to GMAT for help, and then she said, I need to be able to show my scholarship committee, which includes faculty, that this person is in the top 5 percentile of 5% of test takers in his region, even though that individual might not rank highly. So essentially, the essence of this is If you are someone who's an American, you may have a 700. You might still be in the 96th percentile of test takers over here, or you may be a Chinese or an Indian, and you may have a 730. You might only be in the top 10 percentile of test takers in your region. So you need to excel in both quant and verbal. And when it comes to admissions, we actually see that statistic as we look at various students. But here's something that you need to understand. When it comes to top B schools, GMAT's really important. The other thing, you're not competing against the population worldwide, you compete only against others in your region, which means if you are from a competitive group, you need to do well on both quant and verbal. When it comes to scholarships or fellowships, your GMAT score plays a huge role. The question here is region based on nationality or resident? That's a great question. Let's say you're an Indian or Chinese who's on an H1 visa over here in the US. You're still considered as an Indian or Chinese because you are an international student. However, if you're an Indian or Chinese and you are in the US and on a green card, you then compete against Americans. You no longer compete against Indian or Chinese from other parts of the world. So the principle is, if you need sponsorship, you to work in US post your MBA, you are at par with the with other folks from your background, whether it's your country or your profession. But if you don't need sponsorship, then you only compete with people who are from your background within the region. So if within America or within Canada or within other parts of the world. Hopefully that answers your question. Good question. Now, that was in principle. Here are some stats which were compiled by folks on GMAT Club, where they talked about probability of admission based on certain GMAT scores. And what you really see over here is the higher you score on the GMAT, the higher is the probability. In fact, at certain B schools, the chances of getting an admit for the 760 or higher scorers are as high as 50% or 60% at Darden. And this data was compiled from 3,000 students overall. Now, I'm also a member of AGAC, which is an Association of Graduates Admission Council, and every year we meet with B schools, and as we meet with B schools, we spend about a week with all the admission directors at top B schools, and we talk about various aspects and trends every year. These are some of the data points with regards to GMAT. And the importance of it. When it comes to multiple attempts, even though you can cancel your scores, these schools really don't care if you have multiple attempts. In fact, a lot of these schools, if you have a low score and you improve to a high score, and when I say improve, think of 70 or higher points or higher improvement, they consider it to be a positive character trait. They really say, okay, this really shows this person wants to study at a top school and is willing to put in the effort. So they really look at that and really say, okay, that's great. In fact, schools said that, hey, if you've applied to a school and you haven't heard from us, but if you've improved on your GMAT score, let us know. Also, folks from some top B schools said, if you've been waitlisted, why would you not improve on your GMAT score? I mean, what else could you do to improve your candidacy? If you want to apply to Wharton, if you want to apply to Stern, if you want to apply to Columbia, TSP, Chicago, Stanford, Harvard, get to at least a Q46 because they worry about your ability to take on the coursework. A few schools, not every school, would not look at your application unless and until you make the cut when it comes to GMAT. And in those schools, if you approach the admissions officers, they will tell you that. They're very honest with that feedback. And again, pretty much every school confirmed that your GMAT score is a huge bearing on scholarships. In fact, based on my conversation with admission officers, what they really say is your scholarships depend on two things. One is your GMAT score. The second is how you perform during the interview. Okay. Who are the people who participate in these conferences? You can really see pretty much every top B school and every top test prep company. Piyush asks, does GPA also help in scholarships? Typically, GPA is a determining factor in admissions, not so much in scholarships. Again, based on my conversation with admission officers, the two factors that matter is what's your GMAT score and how much they love you, and how much they love you would is predominantly determined by how you perform in the interview. Now, this was some statistical data. Now, let's look at some anecdotal data. And here's an example of a student who took the GMAT 4 times. And he understood the importance of GMAT, and he received full fellowship from Ross, full fellowship from Keenan Flagler, as well as an admit from Wharton. I mean, this guy excelled in quant, excelled in verbal, improved his verbal score from V31 to V44. He spent about $600 on acing the GMAT, and really, the reason he was able to improve to 98th percentile was because he used data to understand where to focus on and where to improve. He received more than 200 grand in scholarships. Has another student who, and these are all full-fledged interviews that you see over here. So you can click on this link and you can watch these interviews once you get the PDF. But there's another student who scored 760. He received not one, but 4 full fellowships. He's now studying at Ohio Fisher. He's actually making $1,700 a month as a living stipend over there. I mean, one of the things that will strike you when you look at this is that this guy has no extracurriculars. He has imperfect English, but he's executed on his essays. He's executed on his GMAT as well as his interview really well. And just by keeping things simple, he was able to get about 130 grants worth of scholarships. And these are not isolated cases. I mean, our students get about $40 million worth of scholarships every year. This is an example of another student who had never aimed for a 740 odd score. Her aim was to get to a 680, but she continued to improve, and she ended up getting an 80,000 scholarship from Georgetown as well as an admit from Kellogg. Her dream schools were Kellogg. She's a businesswoman. Her dream schools were Kellogg and Wharton. She's currently studying at Kellogg overall again. And this is a case of one of the few unique cases where students scored a 770 and received admits from every school she applied to, including Harvard, Stanford, Kellogg, Wharton, and INSEAD. And again, the reason why I have her over here is because A, she's our student, but B, she talks about study strategy, and then she gives out her strategy. And she says, I firmly believe that you should have your own customized strategy as per your needs. And you need to be flexible enough to adapt that strategy. Now, how she approached her MBA or how she approached the GMAT is over here at the link at the bottom. How she approached her MBA journey is something which she outlined with one of her partners. That's Maya Review with Poonam, who's one of the top 5 MBA consultants on GMAT Club. And Poonam has been kind enough to allow us to share this article with you guys, where she outlines how she approached the entire application. And again, I think someone who's gotten an admit from Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Kellogg, and INSEAD, you should definitely look at how that person did it. So, what are the benefits of a high GMAT score? The first is admissions to a top school. The second is scholarship, which is right then and there. The beauty of getting a scholarship is it gives you, not only takes that financial burden away from you, it also gives you that flexibility with regards to, okay, where do you want to live post your MBA? What do you want to do post your MBA? Because if you don't have a financial burden, you're much more free to decide that. If you want to get into consulting, if you want to get into corporate strategy or corporate finance, most likely the person who's going to interview you will have a high GMAT score. So when you walk into that room, and if you have a comparable GMAT score, you'd have that sense of respect in that person's eyes, which I think is priceless. I mean, I've experienced that a couple of times when I was in the corporate world, and as I switched jobs, even within the same company, that respect that the hiring manager had for me was really helped me. And for those of you who want to have an alternate career, you know, GMAT instructors are paid very well. They can easily make $50 to $100 an hour, which I think is a really good insurance. So overall, with regards to the GMAT, it gives you very high ROI. It gives you confidence, and even though the score is valid for just 5 years, it stays with you forever. And in the end, one thing that I want to really say is it doesn't matter whether you study for a month or 5 months to get to that score. What matters is whether you get to that score or not. With that, let's understand how you waste the GMAT. And then we'll look at answering that question. How many questions should you get right to get to a 740 or higher score? Again, remember the key terms: accuracy versus ability. Accuracy is the percentage of questions you get right. There's no difficulty level included in there. Ability is nothing but your comparative performance in a particular section. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to simulate the GMAT for two students. What you see on the x-axis is question numbers. What you see on the y-axis is difficulty level. The higher you go on the y-axis, the higher is the difficulty level. And we're going to simulate it for two students. Student 1, which is the blue line, gets the first question. The first question is always of a medium difficulty level. Student 1 gets that right. Consequently, the second question is of a slightly higher difficulty level. He gets that right as well. A third question then is of a much higher difficulty level. The student gets that wrong. The fourth question is of a difficulty level between question number 2 and 3. How do we ascertain that? You draw horizontal lines from question 2, question 3 and question 2, and you're going to find question number 4 over here is between those two horizontal lines. So it's between those two. You get that right. You get the fifth question, which is of a slightly higher difficulty level. You get that wrong. Student 2, on the other hand, gets the first question. Remember, the first question is always around the medium difficulty level. Gets that wrong. Gets the next question, which is of a lower difficulty level. Gets that right. Gets the third question, which is of a slightly higher difficulty level. Gets that wrong. Difficulty level decreases for fourth question. Gets that right. And gets the fifth question right as well. So if I were to stop this test at the end of question number 5, who do you think would be doing better? Would it be student 1 or would it be student 2? Let's get a few more responses, and then let me put in another question over here. Pretty much everyone thinks student 1 would be doing better. The question is, the accuracy is identical. Why is it that student 1's doing better? Why do you think student 1's doing better? Okay, let's get a few more data points. You get the same difficulty level. Some of you are saying getting earlier questions right matters. Others are saying he's gotten more difficult questions right. So those of you who are saying getting earlier questions correct matters are making an observation, not a causality. But with those of you saying he got more difficult questions right, you're talking about causality. And the reason why I want to make sure you understand that is when you talk about causality, you can get to a repetitive outcome. If you understand that, the more difficult questions you get on the GMAT, and if you're able to answer them, the higher your score would be. You're focusing on causality, and you're going to study the right way to make sure that you do that. If you're worried just about the initial questions, I've seen people not study the right way, and those people usually don't get to high scores. So when you make this observation, what you have over here is student 1 got 5 questions. Each one of them was either at the average difficulty level or above the average difficulty level. Student 2 only got 1 question at the average difficulty level. Okay. Even though their accuracy was 60%, student 1 got a much higher score than student 2. So when it comes to the GMAT, the thing that you have to understand is that you have to achieve two things. One is you have to make sure that the test serves difficult questions to you, because this test has a question picking algorithm. And the second challenge that you have is that you have to answer those difficult questions correctly. So let me ask you this question. When the test served easier questions to student 2, okay, when the test served easier questions to case 2 or student 2, what was the test trying to do? Let me repeat. When the test served easier questions to case 2, what was it trying to do? Okay, I have some good responses, some really good responses. Let me see. Akhil says giving chances to improve, that is good. Understand your level of skill, Vikram said, that is really, really good. Trying to ascertain his ability, Akshat said that, yes. So those are excellent responses overall. So if the test is trying to ascertain your ability, and because you answered medium difficulty questions wrong, or average median difficulty questions wrong to be precise, the test is reducing the difficulty level. But by doing that, what the test is trying to do is it's trying to maximize your accuracy. By reducing the difficulty level, the test is trying to increase your accuracy, or in other words, the test by itself is designed to make you hit what in algorithm terms we rarely say is a local maxima of your accuracy. Can you see that? The test is designed to hit that local maximum of your accuracy, because as you answer medium difficulty questions wrong, the test reduces the difficulty level. So when a test by itself is trying to make your accuracy higher, then measuring accuracy on a GMAT attempt becomes a very futile effort. Why? Because that's a question picking engine. The moment you get a difficult question wrong, it's going to reduce that difficulty level. Okay. So when you ask that question, how many questions should I get right to get over 740? The question by itself, because of the design of the exam, is not the most appropriate question to ask. Okay. Now, that was just in principle. Here's some real data. And this data is about 2 years old, but the GMAT algorithm is still the same. So this is on the verbal section of the GMAT when it still had 41 questions. And what you see over here are the two test takers who basically, when you compare their attempts between question numbers 11 through 20, what you're going to find is their attempts are very, very comparable. They both made 9 mistakes between question numbers 11 and 20. The red rectangles are the question numbers where they made a mistake. Their accuracy is identical between 11 and 20. The only difference over here is that student 2 or case 2 made 2 mistakes in the first 2 questions. Now, when you look at their scores, what you're going to find is they're very different. Student 2 or case 2 got a V32, student 1 got a V43. When you look at the corresponding percentiles, what you find is student 1 is at 97th percentile, student 2 is at 65th percentile, and if you look at the differences, there's a difference of 80,000 students between them. Some of you may be saying, "Oh my God, 2 mistakes and I have 80,000 students between. I fall back by 80,000 students." How many of you are thinking that and really saying GMAT's a really hard exam? How many of you are saying GMAT's a really hard exam? Okay. That's funny that a lot of people think that when you look at this data. What people don't think is, hey, you can get to a 97th percentile despite making 9 mistakes. Or you can get about 25% of the questions wrong or 22% of the questions wrong, still get a 97th percentile. No one focuses, or very few people focus on that. Now, let's map this and really understand what's going on over here. And the reason why I say that is because GMAT's probably the world's best design exam when it comes to measuring your ability. And that's why most of the other exams are trying to mimic the architecture of GMAT. They've not been able to do that, but they're trying to do that. Let's map this on our understanding of how an adaptive test works. Student 2 got the first question, median difficulty level, got that wrong. Got the second question, which is of a 30 percentile level, got that wrong as well. Then got the third question, which is of a 15th percentile, got that right. Got the fourth question, which is of a 20th percentile, got that right. Got a fifth question, which is of 30th percentile, got that right. Got a sixth question, 40th percentile, got that right. Seventh question, 55th percentile. Student 1, on the other hand, got the first 4 questions right, already at 90th percentile, and will continue to answer questions correctly. Now, for those of you who are quant whizzes, tell me what is the probability that you are a 90th percentile student and you get a 50th percentile question wrong and a 30th percentile question wrong, one after the other. What is the probability that a 90th percentile student will do that? Very less. How less? Someone said 1.147, 0. 0.2 is a very high probability. Just to really tell you, a 90th percentile question, 90th percentile guy, his probability of getting a 50th percentile question wrong is less than 0.1. And when you look at that joint probability of someone getting a 90th percentile guy, 90th percentile guy getting a 50th and a 30th percentile question wrong, one after the other, it's close to about 1 in 10,000. 1 in 10,000 is that joint probability. So the test by itself is not very wrong in thinking that student 2 is not a very smart guy and hence is serving easier questions to him. Now both these students are essentially e-GMAT students. Student 1 got a V44, student 2 got a V35. Student 2 was actually really good in quant, so he still had a 710. Student 1 was able to hit a 770. This was GMAT prep data. That's why we have all of this data. Now I'm going to present the real GMAT data with an ESR. Here's a guy who improved from a 520 with a verbal score of 17 to a 710 with a verbal score of 40. Yes, those improvements happen. They're very possible. But the beauty of this, what you see over here is that this student got a V40 and his V40 is composed of his abilities in sentence correction, reading comprehension, and critical reasoning. This is his link. Now, when you download his ESR, what you're going to really see is his attempt progress. And what you see over here is that this student proved to the test that he can solve medium questions really well. He can also solve medium hard questions, and then he can do reasonably well on hard questions. And even though he made a ton of mistakes towards the end, those were on more challenging questions, because of which, despite making 12 mistakes or so, he was still able to get a V40, which is 91st percentile on GMAT verbal. So what I'm trying to tell you is what matters is on what kind of questions you make mistake. Why? Because GMAT's a test of ability. It's not a test of accuracy. You can make mistakes. So the strategy you have to really say is build your ability, prove to your test that you have that ability, and then continue to maintain it. Now, do you remember these guys? You know, one got V43, V32. You looked at their accuracies and were worried about it. That's not how the GMAT looks at it. The GMAT evaluates your ability. So the guy who had a V43 had a 95th percentile in SC, 95th percentile ability in CR, and close to a 90th percentile in RC. Similarly, a guy with a V32 had much lower abilities despite those accuracies. Now, do these guys look different to you now? Do they look different? when you look at them through the lens of ability, and that's how the GMAT looks at them, not through the lens of accuracies. Accuracies don't matter. So the thing that I want to make sure you understand is acing the GMAT is about ability. Okay, build that ability. And then you remember about 30 minutes back, I asked this question. What is strategy? What do you think about it? And about 30% of you talked about time management. Time management on the GMAT. Yes, it's important, but it's secondary to building ability. What you saw with this score report is, as long as you can prove to the GMAT that you have ability, you can get half the questions wrong in the second half of the exam. You can still get a 90th percentile. Okay. So acing the GMAT is about building ability. First, focus on building ability. Timing, exam strategy, bunch of other things can come next. Okay. And the reason I want to make sure you understand this is because it impacts how you study. One of the most common question that I really get is, hey, I just started studying for the GMAT. I understand, what I'm learning, but it seems it takes me 2.5 minutes to answer a sentence correction question. I'm really worried. Don't worry about it. You're just starting to study for sentence correction. Your time to answer questions will reduce, but first focus on building your ability to answer sentence correction questions. As you improve on that, your time to answer questions will automatically improve. Another thing that I want to make sure you guys understand is how the GMAT's different from some of the other exams. So, any of you, how many of you have taken either the GRE or the CAT, the old GRE or the CAT? The CAT is an Indian equivalent of the GMAT. It's an Indian exam. A lot of people think if you've taken the CAT, you can come here and apply the same thing, think the GMAT would be very easy. To a certain extent, it helps, but where it hurts the most is if you bring the same mentality that you had while studying for the CAT to the GMAT, and I'll tell you why. Here's how the CAT or the old GRE worked. In the CAT or the old GRE, you get a bunch of questions to answer. Now, most people can't answer all of those questions. Now, those questions are of different difficulty levels. Some of them are very easy, some of them are medium difficulty, some of them are hard difficulty level. So the way to ace the Indian equivalent of the GMAT, which is the CAT or the GRE, used to be that you choose the easiest questions to answer those questions first, then go to the medium difficulty level, and then if you have time, then you go to the hardest question. Am I correct? That's a good strategy to ace the CAT, right? Start with the easiest question that you can answer quickly, then medium, and then the harder questions. Or you could choose the questions, you could get those right. And the key to acing that is essentially selecting the right question. Okay. On a computer adaptive test such as the GMAT, that's not a choice that's given to you. You have to answer the question that you're served. And the reason why that strategy worked on the CAT is because every question had the same number of points. So the more questions you solve, the more you scored. On the GMAT, difficult questions have 3 times as many points as easy questions do. Accuracy is not relevant. On the CAT, accuracy is all that mattered. Ability wasn't relevant. And which is why when it comes to the CAT, a lot of people really say, I'm going to take 20, 30 mock tests. Why? Because that will help me understand which questions are easy, which questions are difficult. It will help me understand how to make that choice in the exam environment. On a computer adaptive test such as the GMAT, you have to first build ability. And once you have the ability, you take a few mocks, 4 to 5 mocks to really make sure that you can portray that ability over that 3-hour interval or 2.5-hour interval. Very different tests, very different outcomes, very different strategies. And which is why, your CAT test or the GRE have not been a predictor of academic success. If you look at If you Google, is CAT a predictor of academic success in the B school, or is GRE a predictor of academic success in grad school, you're going to find there's absolutely no correlation. Why? Because those tests weren't designed to measure ability. They were just designed as a selection criteria so that uh, B schools or grad schools would not be accused of bias. When you look at the GMAT and really say how much correlation does GMAT have with regards to your performance at the school and post that, you're going to find that correlation number is very high. So again, one's a test of ability, the other is a test of test taking skills. And the way you study for a test of ability is very different from how you study for a test of test taking skills. Does that help? It's really, really important for you to understand this difference. Then the question really is, how do you measure ability in a consistent manner? And how do you get that number as to how you're doing in sentence collection, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension? If you're an e-GMAT student, we give you ability quizzes to measure ability, which tell you your ability scores, whether it's on the verbal side or on the quant side of things. Not only that, we also tell you where you need to improve so that you can focus on those areas, come back, take another ability quiz, and really improve overall. Here's an example of a student who improved from 590 to 750, improved her quant and verbal scores to get, and the way she did it is essentially by focusing on data. When it came to quant, she studied the basics using the quant course. Then she looked at Scholaranium to refine her improvement. So she went from Q35 to Q47 just using the course. Then she went from Q47 to Q50 by using data. She was already at V36. She went from V36 to V42 by first analyzing where she needed to work on, and then she just studied those portions from our course. It is that isolation, it is that ability to pinpoint where you need help is what makes Scholaranium, which is our analytics platform, so precious, and which is why it's the highest rated analytics platform or assessment platform on GMAT Club. And you can really see it has a good number of reviews. The reason why it's rated that high, and in fact higher than GMAT tests, is because of the quality of questions, quality of solutions, and the insights that it provides. So what have we talked so far? We've talked about strategy in the context of GMAT. We've talked about GMAT Planner and how it helps you create your own personalized study plans. Talked about why GMAT's important and how it can help you not just get admissions, but also scholarships and full fellowships. And we've looked at how GMAT's a test of ability and how you can personalize your learning to get to that 740, 750 score. What's still to come is what's the importance of core skills? Why do we have that score plateau and how do we avoid that? And then how do you create that trackable study plan? Now, we're going to solve a couple of questions to understand the importance of core skills. And to do that, we're going to give you the first question, which is a word problems question. Here's the poll in which you're going to put your answer. All right, guys, get those responses in. 3, 2, and 1. Okay, let me end the poll. Broadcast the results. Choice B is indeed the correct answer. 70% of you got it right. Again, let's look at the other question. How did you solve this question? All right. How did you solve this question? Did you do this by making equations, by number substitution, or by using a formula? Pretty much everyone solved this question by making equations. Now, I can tell you technically number substitution is actually a slightly quicker method. It just gives just as consistent responses overall. But the reason why most of you did it by making equations is because your brain's wired to do this. The moment you see Jacob is not 12 years younger than Michelle, what you really say is m is equal to j plus 12. That's an equation start to form in your brain. On the verbal side, that's not the case with most of you. And we need to really follow a certain process to answer questions. When you do that, your brain starts to become wired. Okay. Now, whatever is this is basically the solution for Quant. Now, let me ask this. What are the core skills required to answer a question such as this? What are some of the core skills that you need? Okay, logic. Let's get to a few more. Equations, comprehension. Okay. So essentially, the core skills that you need are, one is you need to be able to work with variables, convert statements into equations, relate them, and then solve these equations. Now tell me what would happen if the core skill that you lacked in was skill number 2, which is converting statements into equations, but the core skill that you worked consistently on is skill number 4, which is solving equations. What do you think would happen if you did that? If the core skill that you lacked was skill number 2, but the core skill that you worked on was skill number 4. Okay, you'll be unable to solve questions, you'll waste time, you'll arrive at the wrong answer. Will you improve? Will you improve at all? No, not at all. You would be stuck despite spending the time. Most of you, when you really say, hey, we keep on studying but we don't seem to improve, you guys do the same thing. You're not focusing on the right aspect. And that is when you hit a wall. That's when you hit what we call as a score plateau. And let's see how that score plateau happens. Now, some of you may be asking, okay, I understand such neatly defined core skills exist on Quant, but do they, first, do they exist on all aspects of Quant? And B, do they exist on all aspects of verbal? How many of you are thinking or asking that question? Do such neatly defined core skills exist in Quant and verbal overall? Okay, let's see that. Let's see whether they exist or not. And to do that, we're going to solve a bold-face questions. But before we solve the bold-face question, I'll tell you, in which grade did you learn how to solve a word problems question? When did you do this? Which grade overall? 4th, 5th, 7th or 8th? 4th, 5th, yeah. Most of us learned this in about 5th to 6th grade overall, and then the complexity of questions kept on increasing. When do you think native speakers of English language learned their core skills? The answer is as early as third graders. This is so. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I have a daughter who'll turn 12 this year. But 8 years back, I was looking for a school for her, and as I was looking for a school for her, I toured a few schools, and the nice thing about this is they allow us to go and look at what students are doing in first grade, second grade, and third grade. And this is what third graders were doing. They were looking at a reading comprehension and looking at how to figure out author's purpose, do cause and effect reasoning, differentiate between fact and opinion. They were learning how to make inferences, how to get to the main idea in details, how to draw conclusions. The strategies that they were using were by making connections, doing predictive reading, by summarizing and visualizing the information that they've just read. This is what a third grader was learning. Now, my daughter right now, should be graduating from sixth grade, and essentially, she can do most of GMAT reading comprehension today. Sixth grader without being taught, just based on what she's learned. In fact, she can easily get a 60th percentile on sentence correction as well. The only section on the verbal side of things that she can't do is critical reasoning. Why? Because that's not formally taught. Just to really tell you, what we learn in our primary school, which is beneficial to us in quant, they learn the same thing in verbal. So with that, let's solve this bold-faced question. I'm going to give you about 3.5, 4 minutes to solve this question. So I'm going to give you enough time. Don't rush through this. Take enough time to get to the correct answer. Okay, and do it methodically. And then we're going to really look at the core skills and verbal as we review this question. And we'll do a detailed review of this. All right, guys, last 30 seconds, get those answers. Five, four, three, two, and one. Let me end the poll. Let me broadcast the results. So, choice is C, choice is D, and choice is E. Choice C, choice D, and choice E. Three of them very popular. Choices A and B are not as popular. So let's see how we go about solving this question. Tell me, how did you approach this question? What did you do in step 1? What did you do in step 2? So on and so forth. Put in your answers, please. Paraphrase the arguments, okay. Okay. All right. Focus more on parallels. The first goes against the argument, and second talks about the original argument. In fact, explaining. Okay, I understood what argument, explanation, and evidence in the sentence. Read the whole passage and then found where boldface fits in. Read the question, identified the argument, and then went on from there. Okay, so there is an approach that most of you followed. Let's kind of look at how we go about doing this. And so at each GMAT, how we solve boldface questions, we first read the passage. The passage is in a boldface question is typically an argument. We read each sentence, we classify whether that sentence is a fact or a claim. Then we create what we call as the structure of the argument. We start with the main conclusion and understand how does each statement relate to the main conclusion, or how does the author use each of these statements to arrive at the main conclusion. Remember, an argument is all about how do you arrive at the conclusion. That's the sole purpose of the author when he writes the argument. Then we look at and focus on the bolded statements, and we look at rethink the role played by them, and then we evaluate the option statements. So let's go about doing that. Okay, we'll have the same argument. We'll go line by line. The first statement says stock prices of companies that exceed $100 billion in revenue, also called extremely large caps, rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. So what is the statement? The author is telling you a data point, a fact, or an observation about this group of companies called ELCs. Let's call this fact A. Then the author tells you that it is commonly thought that this happens because the company is too big to grow faster than the overall market. Now, this wasn't the bolded statement in the original argument. The only reason I bolded this was because I want to differentiate this. Many people over here think that the entire statement is a claim, whereas only the bolded or this underlined portion is a claim or a belief. The overall statement over here is a fact. Now, this is not something that's tested in this particular question, but as questions become more difficult, the test taker will the test maker will test your ability to differentiate that. When you look at this entire statement, which is starting from it is commonly thought, that is a fact or a data point. When you look at the part in bold, that is a claim or a belief. Claim, belief, opinion, conclusion, all of them same bucket. They are interchangeable overall. And just to understand how come a belief is embedded in a statement that we call as a fact, let's kind of understand the core definition of fact versus claim. A fact is something that you don't question in the context of the argument. A claim or an opinion or a belief or a conclusion is what someone thinks, or essentially, by definition, a fact's not questionable in the context of a CR argument. An opinion is always questionable. these two data points or these two statements are really, classic ways. If you say it's 15 degrees outside, it's a fact. If you say it's cold outside, it's an opinion in general in a common day-to-day language. Why? Because different people could have different definitions of cold. Now let's look at a statement. If this statement were on the GMAT, the statement says, according to Business Week, Wharton is better than Harvard. Now, if the statement were on the GMAT and you were to evaluate the statement in its entirety, starting from the according to Business Week, you would call this a fact. Why? Because you're not going to question in the context of GMAT whether Business Week said Wharton is better than Harvard or not. What you may question is whether Wharton is truly better than Harvard, which is Business Week's opinion. Okay. Do you understand how this entire statement is a fact, whereas this bolded part over here is an opinion? So the litmus test is whether you would question that thing in its entirety or not. Okay. So similarly, when you look at the statement in its entirety, it is commonly thought that this happens. You're going to ask yourself, am I going to dispute that whether it's commonly thought or not? And the answer to that is no. Why? Because the author is telling you it's commonly thought. The author is not going to mislead you. So because of that, this overall statement is a fact. It has an opinion embedded in it. Okay. Then the third statement says, however, studies show that ELCs that provide a higher return than the market over a 5-year period, a majority of them are run by their founders. So you get two data points over here. One is authors mention that there are companies that provide ELCs that provide higher return than the market. The second is a characteristic of those companies, which is that a majority of them are run by their founders. Now, this is a bolded statement. A majority of them are run by their founders. That's a fact overall, and it's a fact about ELCs. Which ELCs? ELCs that beat the market. Then the author gives you another piece of information. He says, since most ELCs are run by professional management, that is inherently risk averse. It's another data point. Prior to reading the statement, you had no idea that most ELCs are run by professional management, and that professional management is inherently risk averse. Then the author presents his conclusion by saying the study's findings strongly suggests that the real reason why most ELCs don't beat the market is not that they're too big to grow, but rather that they're under professional management that is too risk averse. This is the main conclusion of the argument. The second boldface is the author's explanation of why ELCs don't grow. This also refutes the accepted belief. Okay, what is the accepted belief? What is the accepted belief over here, guys? Let me put in my poll question. What is this accepted belief? Which accepted belief does it refute? ELCs don't beat the market, too big to grow. Yes. Thank you. Perfect. Fact A. Well, not fact A, but too big to grow. That is the belief. Okay. So when you look at the structure of the argument, how do we go about doing that? That's perfect. The first statement, we start with the author's conclusion. That's there. The statement before that is a data point that supports the author's conclusion. Statement number 3, also a data point that also supports the author's conclusion. Why? Because you look at this and you say a majority of them are run by their founders. What does it do to my conclusion? What if this data point were not in the argument? If this data point were not in the argument, you would really say, hey, my conclusion would be less believable. So if removing that statement makes my conclusion less believable, then the presence of that statement definitely makes my conclusion stronger. It supports the statement. It supports my conclusion. The first statement is a fact on which the general belief about ELCs is based, and the second statement contains that general belief about ELCs. So, what is boldface 1? Boldface 1 is a characteristic of the companies that buck the trend. It's a fact or a data point which is provided to support the author's conclusion. Boldface 2 is the author's conclusion. It is also the alternate explanation that author believes is why ELCs rarely beat the market. Now, I went through this fairly quickly, but hopefully some of you understood it. So Is this clear? The boldface 1 versus boldface 2. What does boldface 1 and boldface 2 do? Now, for some of you, I'm sure it won't be clear. And again, my intent was not to teach you boldface. We spent about 10 hours teaching boldface. And if you didn't understand that, then just make sure you go through the boldface concept and application files, which are a part of the free trial. So we'll now look at the answer choices. And I'm going to really show how you guys performed overall. Here's how you chose the various answer choices. Choice D for delta was most popular, choice C quite popular as well, and choice E very popular too. Okay, let's look at choice A. Choice A says the first is a claim. Is the first a fact or a claim? It is a fact, so that piece is wrong. You can reject choice A right there. Then it says the accuracy of which is at issue in the argument. Do we actually doubt the accuracy of choice A? Of a majority of them are run by their founders? Do we ever question that? No, we don't question that. And because of this, choice A is wrong. Okay. Then now let's look at choice E, E for elephant. Choice E says the first provides evidence to refute something. Refute what? An explanation that the argument favors. What's another term for an explanation that the argument favors? What's another term for this entire part? An explanation that the argument favors. Opinion or the conclusion. Yes, an opinion, conclusion, the same thing. Okay. So a conclusion that the argument favors or the opinion that the argument favors. And when you look at this argument and you ask yourself, how many conclusions are there in this argument? You'll say, okay, there are two conclusions. How many of them are favored by the author? There's only one favored by the author, which is the main conclusion of the argument. So then there are two opinions there. One is of the commonly thought, the other is of the author. And when you say the argument favors, it's the opinion of the author. And then you really say, what does this say now? The first provides evidence and evidence to refute my main conclusion. Is that correct? Does the first go against the conclusion? Not at all. Because the first doesn't go against the main conclusion, I say choice E is wrong. Okay. Let's look at choice D. Choice D was really popular, D for delta. Choice D says the first is evidence that is used to support an explanation that the argument challenges. Which explanation does the argument challenge, guys? Which explanation does the argument challenge? Too big to grow. Yes, too big to grow. The argument challenges this too big to grow notion. It is commonly thought that this happens because these companies are too big to grow faster than the overall market. Okay. Now, does the first support this notion that ELCs are too big to grow? No, it doesn't support. It actually goes against it. The first provides evidence that ELCs are not too big to grow. In fact, ELCs can grow faster than the overall market. So because the support part is wrong, choice D, D for delta, which 40 odd % of you chose, is wrong as well. Choice C, which is the correct answer, says the first provides evidence. Evidence is okay. Okay, that has been used to support something. What? An explanation that the argument favors. What is an explanation that the argument favors? That is your conclusion that we saw in choice C. So this part is correct. Supporting the conclusion is correct too. And then it says the second is that explanation. The second is our main conclusion. So that is correct too. Since all parts of choice C are correct, it is the correct answer. Choice C is the correct answer. 27% of you, or 24% of you got it right. Let's get the poll over here to get that data point too. 26.4% of you marked it correctly. So, what are some of the core skills that were tested? Remember, our goal was to understand the core skills. It wasn't to teach you boldface. That requires a lot more time. When you look at the core skills, there are 4 neatly defined core skills that are tested here. Your ability to classify a statement. What is that particular statement? How does that statement relate to conclusion or main point? Whether it strengthens or goes against the main point. How do the boldface statements relate to one another? And then the answer choices by themselves were quite complex as well. So how do you really break an answer choice into segment, compare it to what you did in your pre-thinking or the structure of the argument, and then evaluate that. Where do you learn all of this? You learn this in our concept files, in our foundation files, in our application files, as well as in practice and Scholaranium. Okay. Now you can really see how these, I'm going to show you how these core skills actually play on your ability to select the correct answer. The first is a claim, the accuracy of which is at issue in the argument. The first is a claim works on your ability to identify, classify a statement. The accuracy of which is at issue in the argument plays on your logical structure of the argument. The first is an objection that has been raised against a position defended in the argument. Okay, the objection is classification raised against a position, again the logical structure of the argument. Choice D says the first is evidence that has been used to support what? An explanation that the argument challenges. That's logical structure and linking both the statements. Choice E says, again, just the logical structure, which is to refute an explanation that the argument favors. You can really see how the incorrect answer choices are built around your core skills. Can you see that? And how lack of some of these core skills led you to choosing one of the incorrect answer choices. Take a look at this again, guys. Can you see that? Guys, you there? Look at them again. Also, can you see that these core skills are as neatly defined as were the core skills in word problems? Can you see it's just as, I mean, and that's the same thing in every aspect of GMAT verbal. It's not just about us teaching you those things. It's about making you aware of these core skills, getting those core skills right. That's what leads to those 740, 750 scores. Once you have those core skills right, you get to these scores. You no longer face that score plateau. Choice D, this is choice D over here, an explanation that the argument challenges. The first doesn't support too big to grow. The first doesn't support too big to grow. The first actually gives evidence that ELCs are not too big to grow. This is choice D for you. Okay, because of this logical structure aspect of it, this is wrong. Okay. So if you want to get to that 760 score, you need to make sure you start at the right point. You need to make sure you understand how much time you need. If you need to make more time, build more time by talking to people around you. When you watch some of the success story interviews that you post, one of the most common thread that you're going to really see is that these people make time. They actually talk to people around them, explain it to them that they would need that. Create a strategy, have that personalized path towards that goal. Get resources that give you feedback on how well you've learned. A lot of people think I'm going to practice from the official guide and that's going to be okay. For 97% of the population, it isn't. If you're already among the top 1, top 2 percentile, OG is okay. But if you're not, If you're at a 550, 600, 650, the official guide won't help you. There are gaps in your preparation. You need to build on those core skills. Work with a system that is trackable, that gives you feedback on where you need help, and that provides those core skills that can really build a bridge those gaps. And then, as you're preparing, measure your ability. Use data to isolate which are the areas you need to work on. Only then can you hit that 750, 760, 770 scores. If you read any debrief, whether it's by an e-GMAT student or by someone else, what you're going to find is, is 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 that they understand the areas that they need to work on, and then they work on it. Okay, do that. With that, let's understand how do you make most of e-GMAT courses and how do you get to a trackable improvement plan. When you think about the architecture of the GMAT, what you're going to find is that GMAT's very logical. It actually, your GMAT score in quant and verbal is built out of 800 is built out of your quant and verbal scores. Your verbal score is built out of 3 subsectional scores. Your quant score depends on your performance in algebra and arithmetic and algebra geometry. Okay. Now, the beauty of this architecture is that acing the GMAT is not rocket science. If you hit those ability scores, you can hit that score out of 800. Also, these ability scores work independent of one another. So how you do in SC doesn't impact your CR ability. How you do in CR doesn't impact your SC ability or RC ability. How you do in algebra and geometry doesn't impact your arithmetic ability. And the Sigma X mocks that we release are the world's only mock that have these independent engines. Okay, if you measure your improvement, you can actually predict your end score. Venkat says this question is so I can create a strategy and understand where I must focus. Do mock tests in the official guide provide accurate assessment? They are an accurate assessment. Unfortunately, those mock tests don't give you any analytics. So they'll give you an end score, but they won't give you a whole lot much. If you work with a Sigma X mocks, it'll give you your verbal and quant score. But beyond that, it'll also tell you your SCCR and RC abilities and your algebra and arithmetic abilities. So you would have precise starting points. Okay. And which is why, we track your improvement, and this is what an average e-GMAT improves by. And when I say an average e-GMAT improves by, this is not just across 50 to 70 reviews that you see on GMAT Club. This is across 2,000 reviews, which is 10 times as many reviews as most prep companies have on GMAT Club. So this is consistent improvement, not just the peak improvement that a few people really report. And we track this improvement. We guarantee this improvement. 120-point improvement, we guarantee it today. And we give you tools to measure this improvement. Whereas most of the other prep companies, they won't give you guarantee. In fact, Manhattan Prep even really says these guarantees are phony. Well, if you don't have a trackable system, you can't provide a guarantee. If you have a trackable system, you can, because your students see that improvement themselves. Let's see why this architecture is different from that of a traditional test prep. And to understand, let's understand the architecture of traditional test prep. In a traditional test prep, you get a bunch of books. You study using books. 80% of that learning happens through books. Then you go to a classroom. 20% of the learning happens in classroom. A classroom typically is a one-to-many model. And then you basically go on and take tests. When you take tests, it's the first time you get an assessment of your preparation. And even when that happens, that onus of analysis, that feedback that's given is very limited. Why? Because most tests will only give you a quant and verbal scores. A few tests will actually tell you your accuracy by difficulty level. But beyond that, most tests don't give ESR-like analysis. How does this architecture align with that of the GMAT? Essentially, it aligns very well at the mock test level, but beyond that, there's very little feedback at preparation stages, which means that When you go through this system, when you read books, when you go through a traditional classroom program, you end up doing a lot of rework. You get frustrated. Why? Because you have to go through the entire system again. And even when you go through it again, you're not sure whether you're improving or not. Why? Because there is no trackability. And a lot of people just end up giving up. We wanted to do something different. We wanted to provide that private tutoring based architecture to everyone. So that's why we created a nugget in which we integrate your concepts, your application, and assessments right then and there. And this is an example of, again, that subject verb module where you see the concept and application integrated. And this assessment is right here, over here, and here. So if you learn the concepts well, you get this feedback at a concept level. If you actually learn the application well, you get that feedback over here. There's no reason why you won't get to that 90th percentile. So when you see how does this architecture align with that of the GMAT, it's not just aligned at that sentence correction level, it's also aligned at the level of modifiers, subject verb, parallelism, comparison, meaning, and so on and so forth. And why is that important? Because you don't get to the 90th percentile simply by studying. You need to focus on perfecting. And it's that ability, that feedback that allows you to perfect, helps you get to that 90th percentile. Here's a student who improved from 40th percentile in sentence correction to 99th percentile in very few days. She got an admit within 10 days of applying. So how do you enable perfection? It's through process first, which means you need to have a consistent way of solving every questions. It's through insights, which you give while learning. And then through that personalization that happens through our GMAT planner, through the skill data engine and Scholarity, through the custom quizzing engine, which allows each one of you to create quiz. A custom quizzing engine allows you to create 10 to 12,000 different kinds of quizzes. And how this personalization happens, you can really see this through the verbs module. This is a verbs module. We teach you the foundation and teach you some application of that. Then we teach you advanced concepts in verbs. Again, you get feedback over here. And we teach you the next set of application as well. And then how do you achieve perfection through this architecture? Let's look at this. You look at the last practice, because then you say, why the hell did this person get this low score? The answer to that is because this person faltered in sequencing, this person faltered in application over here, as well as this conditional verb. If you fix those three things, take a practice quiz again, you're going to ace it. What's the equivalent of 70% in e-GMAT practice test? If you take our ability quizzes, if you take our mocks, you'll get the percentile right away. They give you those percentiles. And just by doing this student can go from a 60th percentile in ability in verbs to a 90th percentile in just about 1 hour. Essentially, it's not just the video lessons that make this powerful. It's the entire technology architecture. It's the entire set of insights. And the reason we are the only prep company that does this in the world is because we have full-time people who work on technology, who work on subject matter, who work on actually making this content beautiful. So to summarize, GMAT is a test of application. It's not just a test of awareness of concepts. To do well on the test, you need to build on your ability. And the way you do that is by building core skills. Make sure you have this entire vision towards your 720, 740, 750 score. Okay. And then as you work towards improving on areas that you need to improve on, you get insights and constantly personalize that journey. Remember what Mansi said, who got into Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. Be willing to personalize this journey. And that's what is really important overall. And Sandra says the planner tracks the hours you study. Not today, Sandra. That's a great question. It's something that we are working on. Remember, when you build technology, you build it in stages. The planner was created, launched in February of this year. It took us about 1,000 hours to build that planner. and we are focusing on building that integration where it's tracking that right away. But yes, I can really see you seeing the vision the way we are seeing that as well. The planner today helps you create that personalized study plan. In the future, it will do that, what you're asking to do. So if you need help with your GMAT preparation, you can write to me at rajat@e-gmat.com, and we'll be happy to help you define your overall strategy. Thank you. With that, let me share the session PDF with you, as well as the batch calendar. Remember, we start our batch next week. Okay, here's the session file. And then if I could also give me feedback on the session, that would be great. If you could provide some feedback on that. Priya says, I'm planning to give the GMAT in August. What official guide should I use? OG 2019 or 2020, either one is okay. So we've actually written an article on OG 2019 versus 2020. You can see the comparison. I would recommend, if you've not purchased any, I would recommend purchase OG 2020 if you haven't purchased any. How do you use a planner further? You can track it. If you study that many days, you can really just say I've studied it for it. And it gives you a sequence. Remember, the planner will always do that. It'll give you a sequence in which you're studying. It'll tell you the end ability scores. What I recommend is take those ability scores and put them actually on a wall. A lot of our students take a printout of the final screen of the planner and put it on a wall so that you have it right then and there. What is the batch system? Akshat asks. I'm asking since you give the GMAT in 30 to 40 days. So, Akshat, for you, write to our customer success team. But most likely a GMAT online course is much more suitable for you. Okay, guys, the Q&A, the short answer pod is not for your questions because I can't provide links in that. So it's the Q&A pod is for your questions. So please post your questions over there, and I will get to them. If you put your questions in the short answer pod, I may not be able to get to them. Along with GMAT, do you also need TOEFL? Yes, you do at most schools. So again, contact the school, but pretty much, schools understand TOEFL is not required if you have a great GMAT score, but it's the university that requires TOEFL, so schools are unable to get around it. I've spoken to B school officers many a times about this and say, hey, we understand it's useless, but it's about fighting the university system. Can you delete some mocks from the whole package? No, you can't. You can't delete any mocks. No, I mean, it takes a lot of money to build a package. Can you apply to the same school in round 1 and round 2 by improving your GMAT score? No, you can't do that. Schools don't accept that. And that's where round 1 versus round 2 actually is no different. In fact, I'll tell you my personal story. I was done with my GMAT in March of the year when I applied. I was very enthusiastic. I applied in round 1, did not get any admit. I applied in round 2. Every school that I applied to, I got an admit. I got 3 full fellowships in round 2. Okay. One of the other things which is there is we just had a student who got multiple full fellowships in round 3 as well. So this is round 3, and this guy got full fellowships in round 3. Here's the example. Does a good score compensate for a bad GPA? Yes, in many cases it does. Do we have any discounts coming up? We don't discount our courses a whole lot, guys. It's just that's not our goal. That's not how we work. I'll just tell you, we get about 800 students a month. Out of those 800 students, 600 don't even write to us. They just experience the courses, look at the reviews outside, and buy it. And that's kind of the model that we operate in. We would rather spend our time and energy supporting you succeed rather than acquiring students just because it doesn't help us build better courses. As a company, we spend about 2,700 hours a month right now on R&D on improving our courses. OG 2020, we pretty much have all the solutions out already and detailed solutions on our blog. Any other suggestion for material apart from the official guide? If you're an e-GMAT student, we only ask you to buy the official guide, nothing else. Since GRE is considered easier for STEM candidates, why is it advisable to give GMAT instead? Again, depends on what you want to do. First of all, GRE is not easier for STEM candidates. Only GRE Quant is easier. But if you're looking for scholarship, then you should definitely look at GMAT. And if you want to see GMAT versus GRE, take a look at this article on overall. And then again, look at B schools. They'll tell you for admission, they kind of consider them at parity, but how do they convert the scores? There's a 70-point delta between GMAT and GRE scores. GRE is still not considered as an indicator of success in B school. It's just another test. Vikram says, I'm planning to take admission next year. So what will be the best way that I should start and prepare? Get done with the test in 3 months and then worry about building your profile. That's what I would recommend. I applied to different schools in round 2, Mr. T. Yes. In round 1, I applied to a certain set of schools. I applied to equally good schools in round 2. And the reason why I got an admit in round 2 is because my application was much better designed in round 2. This was the same GMAT score, by the way. Jagrati says, is it mandatory to buy the official guide even after buying the full online course? Jagrati, unfortunately, the answer is yes. Why? Because GMAT won't allow us to use questions from the official guide within our course. We provide comprehensive solutions and we'll give you the text of a part of the question, but legally we can't give you questions today. And that's why we recommend that our students do this. And even if you buy the online version, you can really buy the online version of the official guide, because we really want you to practice using the official questions in addition to practicing using our questions and look at our solutions. It's just we legally can't do that. I've been talking to GMAT a lot. We are probably only the second company that provides the official mocks and which the GMAT has allowed us to provide, but they still don't have a means to license those questions. I know some of the other prep companies do provide those guides, but most of them are doing it illegally, and I would rather not put you in that position and put myself in that position when I'm doing something illegally. It's their IP. Do you think 5 mocks are ready to enough to prepare? Remember, and first of all, we don't offer 5. We now offer 10 mocks, but these are just 10 full-length mocks. In addition, you also get 20 to 30 ability quizzes in Scholaranium. Okay, so for GMAT Online, we offer 10 mocks. For GMAT Live Prep, we offer 16 mocks. And again, remember this, these are on top of ability quizzes. So you have 30 plus ability quizzes overall. So you're actually, if you look at the number of questions in Scholaranium, you're getting equivalent of of about 20 additional mocks in Scholaranium. So yes, it's more than enough. I have not seen many people use that many. Do we help in profile building and do we review profile? No. I will tell you this. Good admission consultants, you know, they cost about $200 an hour. We work with some the best admission consultants in the world, and they do provide some really good discounts to our students. But anyone who basically really says, I'm going to help you build your profile and I'm going to cost this much, and this much, and they are probably not worth their salt. If you've written the test before and you did not accept your score, then will the B schools get to know? No, they won't. What would the last year you take the GMAT for round one or round two? If you wish to start the MBA next year, round one most likely is going to be towards middle of August. Round two is going to be around end of November. Abraham says I have OG 2019. Is it sufficient to take the e-GMAT full online course and get a 710? Absolutely, Abraham. It is. You shouldn't need anything else. Akshat says, I already have the 6th official marks purchased last year from GMAT. Will the official marks this year be any different? Akshat, I don't know whether the marks that you have were in the new format or the old format. If they are in the new format, then it won't be any different. If they are in the old format, then yes, they would be different. The link to Scholaranium, just log into your e-GMAT account and you can start practicing. Let me just see. Komal, can you provide a link to actually here is a link to Scholaranium. But if you also log into the e-GMAT account, you can really get that. So Komal, you can provide that. Is it better to apply to colleges right after your GMAT or after a couple of years of work experience? If you want to go for an MBA, you need that couple of years at least of work experience. If you want to go for a master's, MS, then you can, in most instances, do it right after you graduate from your college. Noor Jahan says, can you explain about the average from regional test takers? How do they compare scores? I'm from Central Asia. So, Noor Jahan, in your case, you're lucky in the sense that very few people from your area take the GMAT. So essentially, if you have a decent GMAT score, you'd most like, and you have a good profile, you'll most likely be in an advantageous position. So they'll compare yourself against folks from your country. Sandro says, I've been studying CR for C weeks. I felt afraid because of being so focused on one topic, it makes me forget or lose other topics. How do you suggest keep doing so in that? Yes, Sandro, keep doing so. Just make some notes. What really happens is that when you're focused on one topic, you lose some aspect of another topic. But if you make notes within an hour or so, you'd understand, you'd remember what you did. The problem really is if you're not focused on that one topic enough and if you don't make any notes. Anup Barar says, how do I determine what my GMAT gaps are? I usually get certain topics correct, but at times I get them wrong, causing frustration. Take one of our mock tests. It gives you really precise insights. Let me just okay. Let me give you Here's how the insights helped one of our students improve from 700 to 750 in 1 week. Do top 5 schools accept 43-year-olds in the regular MBA program? Okay. So a lot of top schools do. A year and a half ago, actually 2 years ago, I visited UCLA Anderson, and their oldest student in their full-time MBA class was 48 years old. There are certain schools that have a higher propensity of accepting older students than others. Let me just share an article on MBA after 30. You can really look at this. Aditya says, I have negligible extracurricular activities and moderate academic scores. I intend to write the exam in 2019. Could you please advise how can I shore up my profile? Aditya, remember this. Not everyone needs extracurriculars. Not everyone needs great grades. It's okay to not have extracurriculars. We've rarely seen people improve tremendously and get really good admits despite not having great extracurriculars. So don't worry about it, and focus on getting a good GMAT score that actually right away negates grades. As long as you have good work experience, that is probably the biggest thing. Vikram, we don't sell an official e-GMAT guide. No, probably if you didn't get this from this seminar, but we don't like books. Just because books are not dynamic, they don't give feedback, they can't be personalized to your learning. We are big believers in audiovisual instruction, and when you look at the e-GMAT reviews, you're going to really see that. How much time do you need to spend IR and AWA? Do these sections have the same weightage when applying to colleges? So typically what I tell my students is once you're done with the verbal side of things, you can go through our IR course. That's probably the world's most comprehensive course. It's about 2 days worth of effort. Then AWA is about 3 hours worth of effort. Do schools carry the same weight? Do these scores carry the same weight in schools? Not yet, not today. Not in the near future as well, but don't mess up your AWA, because schools really take the AWA sample as an example of your writing, and if you've done horribly on that AWA, it can backfire. Venkat says there are many great universities. Is there a website where I can understand the best universities for a particular field? Yes, on our blog you can really do that. So you can really do that. If you have 8+ years of work experience, does a low GMAT score work? Not really. Not really. If you have 8+ years and if you have a good GMAT score, it still shows that you are very serious about your GMAT preparation. Let me just tell you. Here's a guy who basically improved. This guy has about 10 years of experience. He improved to 730, and he's got really good admits. Is it correct? Is it the correct time to take the test in September to get an admission this year? You'd get an admission next year, which means you'll be starting in fall of 2020. So, but yes. How is Halt? Halt is a good business school. It's among the top B schools in Europe. So among the top 15 or so. It's a good business school. Does GMAT test vocabulary? Not really. So there may be, if you're doing really well, you might really get a couple of RC passages which may have a few difficult terms, but that's rare. But even then, when you see a difficult term, if you understand the sentence well, you'd be able to infer the meaning of words. In fact, when you attend the RC webinar, which is 2 weeks from now, we'll tell you how do you infer meaning of difficult words. So in the classical sense, GMAT doesn't test vocabulary the same way that GRE does. GMAT's a very logical exam. It doesn't want you to remember a whole lot of stuff. The test wants you to think logically. Okay, guys, with that, I want to thank everyone for attending the webinar. It was great having you guys here. Remember, we have an exhaustive free trial. Make sure you attend that. Also, if you've not registered for the free session tomorrow as well as next week, definitely register for the same. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys on e-GMAT.com.